introduce Professor Robert Amor from the Computer Science Department at the University of Auckland. VIPs we work with anyone. And we're very proud to work. We're very proud to work with our consultants and with Auckland University and polytechnics. And the purpose of the project is to bring the whole industry together. And Robert's been a leader in the digital space in New Zealand for many, many years. It's a pleasure to pass you over to Robert as the leader of Thing 2.
Thank you, Greg. I was trying not to say we even work with computer scientists, because that's where I come from. So yeah, it's a pleasure to talk about Theme 2, which is on digital engineering. I kind of feel like I got the hardest of all of the themes, because this digital just covers everything and it's everywhere, and people want everything from digital to solve all of the problems. And of course we can do it, but not within 8 years, I don't think. And great money from MB, but not enough to solve all of those problems in 8 years. So just a little bit of a reminder of what we have done in the past, and for those who have been at the previous industry workshop, where we started off, we had a look at the benefits of digitalization for New Zealand. So there's a report, many reports up on the BIP website around this theme, and that looked at from overseas trips and looking at people who are leaders in this field, what is it that we could bring to New Zealand and would have benefit in New Zealand, make change in New Zealand. And there's a set of 10 recommendations that we have in that report, which even though it was done 4 years ago, I think are very pertinent to what we still need in New Zealand. We did some work on location standards for utilities in New Zealand, so trying to come up with a standard for location, where things are, and get everyone to use the same sort of standard. That'd be nice, eh? So we know where things are in this country. Did some work looking at classification, so people using different classification systems, and as you go between systems and tools, we can't really go between systems, so can we have computerized ways of mapping between different classification systems that we have? And the answer was no. But we can do some of it, perhaps about half of it. Last workshop we had a strong input that more work on AI was of interest and necessary in the construction industry, that really there wasn't very much being promoted in that area, or in comparison to other industries, that artificial intelligence was not being considered as much. And so there is a piece of work, and I'll talk a bit more about it later. I'm looking at that. One of the first things that we did was looking at trying to identify PPE on construction sites. So from video and photos, can we see if someone's wearing a hard hat or not, or safety glasses or not, or those sorts of things? And the answer is no. Well, about 60% chance, 65% chance of us getting it right. But it's a starting step to look at how these technologies can be used, and gives us an understanding of what we'd need to do to be able to get much more assurance about the ability to do that. And then a whole range of case studies of use of technology in projects and inside organizations. So in this hour that we have, I'm going to talk about three things, three projects hitting at different areas. So the BIM Safe project, which I've really talked about, is something immediate, something that we're doing now. Axum Compensation Corporation are funding this, and they want to see guidelines which are usable by the industry in the next year or 2 years. And so very immediate work, which is meant to have very broad impact. The second project is more around asset management, and how do we get the right information from the design, construction, through into the asset management phases, and change the behavior of the industry to make sure that is happening. That's not going to happen within 1 year. That's going to be a more midterm project. And so looking at what we're doing in that space. And then a third one, which is a longer term project and more research project, looking at how we use natural language processing to address code compliance checking. So we have 600 codes and standards out there that are applicable to our buildings, and translating them into a form that a computer can use. Obviously a huge amount of work for lots of people who don't exist and know how to do that. So again, can we use computing techniques to give us a way to automate that? And that's a longer term problem, and I will be talking about that towards the end. So the report that we did at the very start, I think was quite useful, the digitalization in the New Zealand building industry. And one of the things that we did in there, and we're repeating every year, is a survey of the industry to understand from the New Zealand industry what they think is going to have a big impact in the technology space and what's likely to be happening in the technology space in the area. And so this gives us a way of measuring against what's happening in the rest of the world. So where does New Zealand see itself? Where does it see its major problems? And over the years, we should be able to see some of the trajectory of what's seen as important there. You probably can't read the small print there, but the numbers on the far right and up the top are the high impact and most likely technologies for use. And that cluster of 12s there is integrated BIM. So everyone sees BIM and integrated BIM as having most likely in the industry, and it's going to have the biggest impact. And then quite a bit further back, but still quite high, prefab. I guess that surprised me a little bit that the New Zealand industry saw prefab over and above pretty much every other technology has been quite likely, or very likely, and having high impact in there. 3D scanning, perhaps not so surprising, but also up there. And then down at the other end, things that are not so likely and maybe not having so much impact in the near future. Blockchain is the one that's down the bottom there. So the New Zealand industry not seeing blockchain as being impactful at the current time. Additive manufacturing, again, fairly low there. So we're not going to see 3D printed concrete buildings in New Zealand for a while, perhaps. UAV and autonomous construction, so robots on sites and machinery controlled, automatically controlled. Again, things that were seen as not likely to impact in the next few years. But as I say, I guess a lot of you have been surveyed in this already. We are running the surveys every year, and so we're going to be able to build up an understanding of what industry thinks is important and where they think they're going to be putting the effort. So the first of the projects I'm going to talk about is BIM Safe, and I'll get Greg to talk about BIM Safe. And the screen went blank. Oh, where'd that go? Oh, no, that's not it. Help. Let's do this on the screen here, sorry. My screen here has gone blank. So I will be talking very briefly about the BIM Safe project. I'm talking to someone else's slides. Paul Duggan is the project manager for this, and he has very inconsiderately gone on holiday, but that's okay. So, and show again, sorry, did we not? Wait. So BIM Safe, we were approached by the Canterbury Safety Charter, who was set up during the Canterbury earthquakes in the rebuild to work towards zero harm in the rebuild, because they were looking for a new project and identified that really industry was not using technology to its best effect. And so they approached us to see whether we could go to partnership to see how we could use BIM and digital engineering to improve health and safety outcomes. So just some statistics there. Construction, 10% of our national workforce, but 15% of the ACC claims. It's not only in New Zealand, but internationally, construction does have high injury rates and death rates, but in New Zealand, we are higher than most of the rest of the Western world. We are very poor at our health and safety in the construction space.
And the construction sector has a low uptake of technology. So BIM is a natural, I think is a fairly natural space for us to be working in. It's one of the areas that everyone is prepared to, health and safety is one area that many people are happy to collaborate in. And it has added benefits, not only health and safety, but in, improvements in productivity as well. So we approached ACC and we are funded, this project is funded by ACC. It's a 3-year project, and we also apply our BIP funding from MB into that project. And the purpose of it is to reduce risk and injury using visualization and collaboration powers of BIM. Partners ACC, BIM, University of Canterbury Safety Charter, and we are working on a project which is being built down in Dunedin, the new ACC building, which is owned by Naitahu, but will be rented by ACC. We have a steering group over the top of us. So Chasm's the National Health and Safety and Construction Group. We have the Canterbury Safety Charter representative Ian Campbell, formerly from SCIRT, and Lindsay Crossan, chair of our board here, who provide oversight across the project. And we have an advisory group, which is ever growing. That was from the launch a few months ago. Quite a lot of representatives from across the industry and growing influence across the industry. We're getting interest from a very broad range of people. And a lot of in-kind support. I have to commend the industry and the amount of in-kind support they're giving to this project, particularly in the steering group, and some real leadership from the likes of Wallen and Marnie and Vizian, Build BIM, RCP, really great leadership. So, project outcomes: reductions in accidents and injuries, and how do we change stakeholder behaviour throughout the facility's lifestyle. Most of our emphasis is on the design and construction phase, but it does carry through the whole of life to the asset management and maintenance phase as well. So, a number of phases. We start with an international literature review, and we're developing papers, putting in the best practice that we can see from overseas. From that, we then develop guidance papers that will be moved out to industry. And those papers are on design, construction, procurement, civil works, structural works, and sub-trades. So from that, the practice guidelines for integrating health and safety into BIM. We'll be developing video and resources for sharing this with the community, stakeholder surveys, national roadshows, and media articles. I don't know, has anyone seen anything come up about BIM Safe at all in there? No? One person. It will be growing. 3 project work streams: guidelines, case studies, and knowledge transfer and extension. Case studies are going to be particularly interesting because they'll be working on live projects and testing out the guidelines and seeing how they operate and seeing what we need to change as we go along. 3-year project. I guess the question is, what happens after that 3 years? Because this will be ongoing. You know, this is not stopping at 3 years. This is something that needs to continue for as long as we're in construction. So this is just a view of the new building down in Dunedin, right on the corner. It's a very complicated site. It's a little triangular site on multiple levels. Some interesting groundwork that's already underway. As you said, there's just been a slight delay while the tendering process goes ahead, but the project is still going full bore. Yeah, just an external view from the BIM model and the rendering. And just putting a flyby there if you want to we can see what's doing. Are there any questions about the BIM Safe projects? Because we are in conversation with people in the horizontal sector as well. And we are hoping to be able to extend this to a large horizontal infrastructure project working in the same manner. So hope to effectively double the size of BIM Safe. Yes.
One of our biggest safety challenges in horizontal infrastructure is service strikes. How do we manage them, especially when New Zealand utilities are notoriously bad at keeping data?
Yeah, service strikes. Obviously, that's very important for civil works. It's hugely important in the horizontal sector. I think that is a serious piece of research. So we will be learning the lessons from the various activities internationally, things like the muddy lessons that are happening in Australia around underground location of underground utilities, and potentially working towards building the digital twins of those facilities. But that's a long-term game. But we don't have the answers yet. I think if you posed the question for us, it's definitely on our radar. Perhaps our ground penetrating radar.
Who's actually doing that horizontal work? So just given technical services and design in Question City, 1.3 million to deliver a horizontal BIM project to start CCC on its digital journey. But one of the things is, they're still very much in the 2D world. They need to move into that 3D world. So who are you doing this with? So obviously we'd like to share, learn.
Well,
You've obviously got Untitled, but who's doing that horizontal bit?
Who's doing the civil in the Dunedin hospital, in the Dunedin building? I'm not sure who's doing the civil works. Do you know, Kristen, who's?
I'm not sure who's doing it in the Dunedin stuff. We've been doing some stuff through Visiting and industry, not in the general area.
Kristen, so can you just go up the microphone?
We've been doing a little bit with some of our industrial partners that are doing some work to retrofit some of their sites, and we've been doing some stuff in the horizontal for them, but we haven't been doing a lot of it yet in New Zealand. We are doing more in Australia though, so I can probably put you in touch with some people.
Are you just talking about the mapping of underground?
No. I'm talking about the full life cycle of developing that digital model, that digital twin, from conception through construction to asset management. So leveraging the whole thing. So you're literally looking at interfacing a vertical component with a horizontal component. Being selfish, I'm interested in that meter, well, a couple of meters below where the interface is. So it's the connection and how you're actually doing that. I've been really, really interested in.
Let's talk. Very keen. There is a lot of work being done in Wellington, as you're possibly aware at the moment, in the space, and we are linked to that.
You're handy.
We're handy. Yeah. We'll talk, Dave. Don't go anywhere. So,
Greg, I'm looking at the outcomes and the outputs of the project. The research papers, best practice guidelines, case studies, workshops and road shows and social media. So I think what I'm really interested in is the research paper and the best practice guidelines. Can you just elaborate a little bit on the best practice guidelines? So you're looking at a new BIM project, and there will be some guidelines, maybe national guidelines that people will follow to ensure safety and take some. Is that kind of the goal?
yeah, the purpose of the guidelines, and they're being written by practitioners,
yeah,
with information from academics, so support from academics, but they're written by practitioners for practitioners as to what is the best way to go about integrating BIM in health and safety into your processes. So I can't say what those guidelines will look like,
Yeah.
right at the moment, because we don't know until we've started drafting them. But Kristen is actually our chief editor. She might be able to help a bit more.
Hi, yes. So I'm the editor. So we've got an outline of what those guidelines are going to be, and there is some mirroring of the research papers that are going to be written as well. So the way that we've structured it is we've got some key themes of topics that we think are of particular interest in terms of trying to get things right. We've also got some of the elements are drawn on specific users of those guidelines. So there's an element where we've got a section that's dedicated for subcontractors. We've got one that's in terms of consenting. So those components are coming in as separate chapters. We are hoping to be able to incorporate small case studies based on the practitioners that are writing from their experience, so they can give examples of how they have applied these methodologies and recommendations that are within the guidelines as well. So that's part of the vision for what we're trying to achieve. So we're at the very early stage of drafting at this point across the authoring committee. But if you want more information, please do feel free to just touch base and we can give you updates.
Yep.
Right, I think in the time we better move on. So I think I've left you at the same place there, Robert. Yes, maybe not quite.
I guess just on the technical one, we have talked with NextSpace around the modeling of the vertical and horizontal, some of the work that they've been doing around digital twins, trying to demonstrate that to councils and to other people. So we've seen some technology partners that might be interested in working in that space. So the second topic, so this is more around the asset management. And for those who follow what happens in the UK, this notion of the golden thread, the flow of information right through the project to ensure that everyone is getting what they require at the different stages of the project all the way through to the asset management is a notion that I think we're all very interested in. It's one that makes a lot of sense in terms of how we think about the information that we need, that we are getting, and gives us a way of ensuring that we're getting the right information from the different stages. So identifying who should be providing information at different stages, what level of information they should be providing or are able to provide, and how do we assure that the information that is needed at the end is being collected all the way through. We have ways of understanding what is coming through and what is still needed as we go through the project. This project, I think, is a good example of how we work with industry and the benefits that accrue to the BIP project and research, but also to industry from having these sorts of collaborations. So this project is working with the University of Canterbury, the design of a new recreation centre, which is now on hold, but we went through most of the stages before it got put on hold. But there's a real learning process as we go through. And so for the University of Canterbury, who hadn't looked at how they use how they understand the flow of information that they need through to asset management, what could they get from them, what would they need to do to make sure that they're getting the right information from the design phase and the construction phase. Their understanding, that the learning that they went through was very, very valuable for their team. Also very valuable for us to see where the pitfalls were as we went through that, and understanding how you had to address the different parts of the process and the team to make sure that you were getting the right information as you went through it. So the partners in the project are all very interested in making sure that we found an effective process. And so there was a lot of learning through it. We're aligning very closely with the international standards for information processes, the ISO 19650, which came from the UK, the BS 1192, for people who are familiar with that standard, which has been developed in the UK over decades, 25, 30 years that they've been working on those standards, now become an international standard, and give you a way of understanding the flows of information, what needs to be modeled, what needs to be collected, where it needs to come from, and how you make that possible for your teams. The process, or as part of this process, so we looked at developing a tool. We developed a tool, a spreadsheet-based tool, which gave the team a way of understanding what information they needed. So being able to identify what information was going to be needed at the end of the process for each of their assets, the kind of little check boxes to say what was needed for the particular process, where it needed to be collected from, so who would be supplying this information, which phase of the project was it going to be coming from, and coming up with a standardized process that you could roll out project after project after project. So you weren't just doing this one off, but you had ways of being able to replicate this as you went into new projects, giving you the assurance that you were getting the information that you needed. The process, the toolkit was tied into the BIM tools, so we could create templates that would go into Revit. So when you create objects in Revit, the information that the asset owner required was visible for the objects that were inside Revit. So you had a way of guaranteeing that as you went through the different stages, the information that was needed was visible, could be put in, that you could check that the information was there. So when you got through at the other end, you had all of the information that you needed for the tools that you're using for your asset management. This project has been taken forward. So KiwiRail has developed a tool along the lines of the tool that we had. We had a very big spreadsheet, which by the time you put in all the classification codes and all of the objects and all of the people that are there, kind of syncs most computers. KiwiRail are doing a slightly more intelligent approach to that, and we're looking also at how you might put this into a cloud-based, web-based service that could be used by people in the industry who wanted to do work in this area. Part of what happened during this project also was a recognition that asset owners were not very well represented in the digital space, and there was an initial committee that was set up, the Digital Asset Owners Forum, which has been relaunched with support from the Construction Sector Accord. And you can see there a number of very large asset owners are part of this, looking at identifying what their needs are, identifying projects which have helped increase the ability of asset owners inside this space. Can we stop at each of these questions on this project? So
How do you get on that selective list? Major asset owners.
are you putting your hand up?
The CCC's there and invited, and well, they're on the invite list. Not sure who went to. Probably 2 years, I guess.
This Christchurch Airport have recently reached out to me because of the work I'm trying to do in the BIM space and CCC, and said, how do we leverage on this? How do we get on board? And also Christchurch Holdings Limited, we've recently had a get together, looking at service strikes, looking at cross collaboration of digital data, looking at onboarding of digital data, and sharing that information on an open source platform. And again, the adoption of Civic.
Yeah, so I think the Digital Asset Owners Forum is very open. They're welcome major asset owners to join. So yeah, put your hand up, talk to Greg, and we can make sure you get an invite
We
to.
did a lot of talking.
Yeah.
If we could pop back to that focus.
Or the,
Yeah, I'm just thinking there's a box missing there, procure, which I see it's off to the side of construct.
Yeah.
But that's the big area we would try with Dave and questions of the council, water asset management. And what we're finding is we don't know the wrong stuff's been put in and what's in the ground buried. And if we have a contractor to pull it out and put the white stuff out, we can end up with the front page of the newspaper. So something that just says, just leave it there, the right tail for 20 years.
Yeah. So I think you're right. Procurement seems to be missed in a lot of places. The work that you've done in the BIM safe, there's almost nothing internationally in procurement for health and safety. So it does seem to sit at the side and not be addressed very well, and it is something we are aware of in other projects.
And actually, I guess it doesn't, because procurement is actually part of every single part of those boxes. So actually, the asset information specification tool that we're developing is actually a procurement tool. It's about managing, procuring that data. How do you specify what you need? So what,
At the digital twin forum in Wellington, 3910 is up for review at the moment, and I've asked our procurement team. I said, "Is there any word on the street about this being incorporated into a 3910 contract?" And they said, "We don't know, but we can insert it under the special clause conditions." So I'm hearing chatter that it's in. It's yeah, no, right.
Just from my recent experience in the BIM safe research highlighted it, that there is a major blockage of procurement. There's quite good BIM through design, architecture, quantity surveying and those sorts of things. But continuing through in the commercial phase to the contract and the build is not there. And to me, it's a major opportunity missed. The point just raised a moment ago about the wrong components put in the ground or whatever it might be. You're missing out on the continuity of standards and sign off of quality and all those sorts of things are not happening. And at the build stage, not at the commissioning stage where they're identified and we've got a problem here. That's too late. That's a lot of wastage. So if you can do it right through, procurement is pretty important. So having BIM continue through procurement as an active item and used by the construction industry, and that's one of the major things that's got to happen. The construction industry's got to get on board with it.
Okay, two comebacks to that. CCC is currently looking at those first three boxes, the design, construct and management. Secondly, I've talked to a lot of contractors who are very open to onboarding the technology. And I think it was made earlier that it's a genuine desire that they want to do things better, because the way that they have to log stuff, like what they're putting in the ground, test and inspection plans, it's very laborious, it's very manual, there's a big lag time, couple of weeks, so as soon as there's a mistake, they're already 2 weeks ahead and the trench is backfilled and so they're really, really open to it. But I would certainly like to see a push, and one of the things that we're going to try and do with this first project at CCC is in that construction phase, leverage off the digital model, the digital twin, the data sets, the LOIs, etc.
So I see from a project management point of view, I see your important links are through between design and construction in the procurement phase. It's got to be a very active part of the procurement and the negotiations and the understanding that people have capability to do it. And then between the construct and the manage phase, you've got a commissioning and handover phase, and you have asset management plans and operational plans and all that sort of thing. Well, BIM's got a big role to play there in terms of efficiency.
Oh, huge.
And so I think the effort's going to have to go into both of those phases to make all those 3 points work.
One of the great things the ISO 19650 did is the procurement. So it created a framework to fill really that gap in our industry, which is
sorry, online people.
so yeah, something that obviously we had a big gap in our industry, which is the procurement. So that's really where the ISO 19650 comes in. In the procurement, to set that framework so that you procure your right data, information, digital models, etc. As you mentioned at the beginning of course, at the commissioning, so you can go and validate it. I think that's really the main contribution of the ISO 19650 is to fill that gap. And if you go to the next slide, that's really what it shows. It's that. This one here.
Yeah.
If we we take a step back to our previous presentation, that's actually also about procurement. The framework is all about procurement. So our long-term goal after, is to actually bring all those things together. The seismic framework is just one other procurement tool. So it is actually something that we take quite seriously, and maybe we haven't stressed that enough in our presentations.
I love this discussion. So spending the last now 12 years in mapping in this space, something that I would like to talk about as well, and something that should be up for consideration, is how the data is acquired. So it's all over the place. And I remember spending a lot of time up in front of Surveying Spatial back then, New Zealand Surveying, as they were going through their BIM trials. And then coming through into this space and then other spaces, that process, that manual process of data acquisition, what are they utilizing, what are the geospatial technologies they're using, how they're grabbing those data insights, where those data insights are going into, and what those platforms look like has been really interesting. The other thing is there's multiple sets of technologies that are grabbing that data. It's not just radar, electromagnetics and all the other stuff going on. It's how they're bringing in the drone data, all of that whole big data cluster F of crazy is a big conversation, and has been for many years, especially in this space and what we're talking about now. So you can get all of this absolutely spot on, but that manual data acquisition all the way through to data dissemination is so very important, which I've seen in reference here. But I just wanted to smack that on the table as well. Smack away.
We do have a question remote as well.
Thank you. I think from my point of view, we have two hurdles in that BIM space. And the first one is from the client to the design team. And then the second one is from the design team into construction. And what I have experienced coming from a contractor background and now being in a consultancy is that everything is really money driven on site. And if the contractor puts in a price for so many different disciplines and chooses in every discipline for even just the medium price, we will end up with too many contractors on site that have not allowed for 3D modeling. And that then goes back to our specifications and the client requirements, etc. So if we start outlining our desire for BIM early in a better way, and it makes it into the documents that the consultants are providing to then become requirements for pricing, then I think we have a chance of jumping that hurdle, because at the end of the day, it all goes back to money. But it leaves the consultancies at this point of time in a very coordinated 3D space. So it can be taken further, but it's often not due to the selection of contractors on site.
I agree. It's very siloed, not just every single process. People are recreating their files, reusing it. It's not integrated in the way that we always imagined it would be.
I was going to ask, have you looked towards the aviation sector, or they're building complex entities with ongoing maintenance and operational demands?
Yeah,
usually with a multitude of suppliers that have sometimes a one-off or ongoing involvement in that final product. It seems like that's an industry that's very mature and very in front of what construction is wanting to be.
They're very mature in 3D object management. So yeah, we have looked at PLM and those areas. Almost everything they do there is about 3D. They'll have a 3D space for a light. They'll pass that off to the contractor who's building the light to go into that space. But it's not really object based in the same way that we have with our BIM models. So almost everything is done at a geometry space and clash detection and making sure things fit. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's very intelligent. And a lot of the systems that they have are really just geometry, and it's really hard to simulate more than how do you put it together?
We just have a question remote, Robert. 1 second. All right, so this is from Mayank. Hi, Joe. Question for the group. Is there any working example in NZ that uses BIM for whole of life asset management and asset information life cycle?
We'd like to know as well.
Yeah.
I think Auckland airports close. Well, I think lots of people are looking at it, but and I guess part of what we do a bit is to try and find people who are doing this, and develop case studies from it as to how they're approaching it, where it's problematic, how far they've got, and what else needs to be done, so that we can inform the industry of what is possible and the steps that they take to be able to achieve that. We haven't seen anything that's fully integrated all the way through. The same way that we haven't seen anything that's fully integrated BIM across all the processes on a project. It will happen one day. I haven't seen it in New Zealand yet.
So I maybe make a comment, which is not necessarily a qualified answer, unless we've got Carl on the call and he is listening. No, I think I'd echo that around the maturity of Auckland Airport. Certainly as leaders in the whole of life information management as a precursor to, or bigger picture than BIM perhaps. Just wanted to maybe make a quick comment on the slide that you had with the golden thread on it about the importance, and I'm sure Greg you can elaborate, is that one of the really important conversations that the Digital Asset Owners Forum are having at the moment is around this call to industry. And my understanding is that there's discussions that are progressing, and there's likely to be a letter to industry, saying we're serious about digital engineering, which is the label. And here's what we mean by that, and here is how we want you to participate, because ultimately that we're the procurers of your services and the owners of the contracts that we work to. And I just think that's going to make a step change in New Zealand. Across the whole industry, no matter whether you're a designer or a contractor. So I think that's a huge thing. And a lot of that is coming from the maturity that we're seeing of members in that group, and Auckland Airport certainly being the recognised leader in that space.
Insofar as local government is concerned, is this digital information looking at situations where, in the case of a council, 1 year it awards a contract for milling of an asphalt, and a year later, laterals are then being dug up and replaced, and we've had that in Christchurch on a number of occasions. Just wondering if, in fact, that's the level that you're looking at taking this to, obviously avoid not only embarrassing situations, but of course, unnecessary cost and expense.
Our works plans are mandatory 5 years in advance. So what we're doing today, Dave wrote the brief for 5 years ago. I acquired the budget for 6 to 9 years ago. There's that bigger lag in the process. Most of the time it comes down to individuals within council. And systems are great, but people are the weak point in them. It'll hit the paper this week or next week. We're about to dig up one of the brand new cycleways to put a sewer under it. The cycleways team has not put their program in the forward works viewer, and everyone else has. So against each of my pipes in my asset management system, I've got the street it's on when it's planned to be resurfaced, and we aim to get in there first. But if the cycleways team won't fill out that column, what can I do?
You also get a lot of reactive stuff. Sale GP is a classic. It's not in the L2P. It's all of a sudden council has signed up to, we want to hold this event. So there is no budget allocated for it. So that is unplanned work from a variety of different units within council. So pump stations, all my wastewater pipes, we've got stormwater in there, we've got roading in there, we've got Littleton Port companies saying, oh, well, you're doing this, we want to do this. That's all reactive, scrambled stuff. So we try and plan as best we can, and data is key, and systems to show what we're proposing, etc. But as Mike said, the weak link is when people don't follow the process. And I'm going to go on a limb here. You've heard the expression silos. So their KPIs is deliver this. To hell with everybody else. And that's what I heard from Christchurch City Holdings. Orion, Enable, their key driver is spend money, make money. When we start turning that on its head and saying, if we collaborate better, it's better for everybody. As soon as we start mapping all this infrastructure out, when AF8 kicks off, the recovery phase, we will be able to work smarter because we know what's in the ground. And we don't waste money trying to find stuff, dig stuff up, or going back over. So it's an ongoing, it's a battle. And one of the things that I'm finding talking to everybody across New Zealand now as part of the water reform, everybody is talking about the same things. Somehow we've got to corral everybody together to work on, you know, a one-page spread, a one-page, you know, this is an idiot guide to how we do this. And I'm hoping what these guys are doing and what we're trying to achieve is going to go a big step towards that.
And the politicians as well are very big, the political drivers. So Dave mentioned Sale GP. Cycleways is another one. The politicians are setting the timeline, not the engineers. Another one, Richmond Road, the big mess that was made there was all down to the mayor promising the regional council would paint bus lanes on the road. Then it was realised that the crown of the road was such that putting the buses beside the curb and channel, they were going to take out the verandas on all the shops there. And then Transport got involved and said, we have to mill down the road. And we said, well, we've got 70-year-old AC pipes at only 600 cover. You reduce it to 400 cover and the machine vibrations, they're going to fail. So suddenly it went from painting 2 green bus lanes on the road to a huge major infrastructure project that there was no money for in budgets, and yeah, all down to a politician saying something without taking any advice from the engineers.
Not just the politicians, to be quite frank with you, this is a governance issue.
Yeah.
This is people at that level that do not have that strategic foresight or getting the knowledge to be able to make informed decisions around the governance tables. That the Sale GP is CNZ, you know, that all came through that space, but it was facilitated and really rock and rolled by Leanne and CCC. So this is a governance issue at all levels, not just our local body government, at all levels. And this is why we need more of you in those rooms to be able to elevate and really aid in making more decisions. So yeah, we'll leave that one there.
Yes, interesting political circumstance. Sorry, we are just running over time, and Robert did have to shoot off to another appointment. He will be back over lunchtime. So if it's okay, we'll just move on. We don't have much time to look at the third topic, but we would just like to revisit what the message that we got in March 2021, which was how important was AI to the industry, because we started some projects, and to be honest, it's not a lack of expertise. There's great expertise both here in Canterbury and at Auckland, but we did struggle to find the effective use case for AI at this stage. There's certainly the work that Robert is doing in codes and consenting, we think is very valuable and needs to continue, but just trying to capture the view of representatives here as to how important we should be pushing artificial intelligence within our work. What we have tended to do is work at the very fundamental level, try and work at those things like the data standards level, those things that are often missed. And I just wonder whether AI is very much enabled by doing that, but is it important for us to do? Question. Because bear in mind, to do it, we also need industry to stump up the funds to say this project is important.
Not even going full AI, but just semi-intelligent stuff or semi-autonomous. We recently tried to speak pipe the drone. Allowed in terms of law. You're not about to fly when everyone was making a fuss about privacy and drones flying everywhere. You're not about to fly a drone out of eye line if you own it. So we can't fly up the pipe, it's not visible.
Right. So those regulation, yeah, I mean, those are the things that we pick up in case studies and understand the regulations. So being involved in those case studies are really important for us to help share those lessons. We can lead some things, but we also need to capture the lessons within the industry and follow the lead of the industry and pick up those threads. So if you've got things like that and case studies that are worth publishing, then come to us because we'd like to do that.
Great, we've got a meeting tomorrow. We're going to release 23 terabytes of old CCTV footage. We want to look at developing a system where we use AI to do a first cut on pipe damage assessments. So very similar to what we use in SCIRT with the asset assessment spreadsheet, but on steroids.
Is that CCC or CityCare or both?
Well, CityCare approached me as the asset owner and said, "Do you mind?" I said, "I don't mind, but we're all part of the." That's where the Christchurch City Holdings Limited came in. So we're all part of the same entity. So what's good for CCL is good for CCC, which is good for ratepayers of Christchurch. So I said, we want to be involved in that. So that means tomorrow.
So we are exploring an option with Watercare and CityCare because they're currently moving to a server for their CCTV data. We're looking at hosting there in Auckland to do exactly that for that discussion. So it's early stages. So I think we should another conversation. Yet another conversation. Ed.
Yes. As our ecosystems converge, our infrastructure is converging, which is exactly what this corridor is all about, right? So as we're looking at this hyper-convergence of infrastructure, there are some AI algorithms to aid us in multiple areas, and one of those definitely is in the monitoring area, which is highly relevant in today's spaces, especially as they're talking about through waters and other areas as well. Our smart technologies that we currently have are not where they are going to go, not where they're going to be. They are going to be at that level. So if we're not looking at it now in a big way to really have a look at this space and how it can aid in that hyper integration, which is what we're all doing at the moment, we are going to be behind. And I think that we're in a good space now, especially with coding bias, AI bias, all these other papers that have been released that have proven the research is done in that space to aid us and give us those tools to move in the right direction when it comes to AI. But there's other bigger considerations when it comes to artificial intelligence. And I would rather that the thought process before an activation in this space is done at a very high level and a very detailed level before we move forward.
And I guess it's quite pertinent that we have Ruth in the room. Pretty cool here, but just it's a question of whether it's us or whether it's there's other research that should be doing in that space, being we're at a very applied end. And if we can work in that space, we'd love to, but we do require industry funds to do that. Our funds, all our MB funds are tied to industry funds, so we have to get industry funds first to do that research. It would be a fantastic opportunity because there is real skill. We have real skill in this country in the universities and actually in industry, and how we bring it together.
I think there's probably a conversation around collaboration across the research programs and the research space, the integration, because you're right. You've got one funding model, we've got a different funding model, but it's very nice we might be able to just.
Okay, any, yeah, Mike?
Yeah, just in terms of your question, it's not just AI, it's also build safe. You mentioned the construction industry is a very low uptake of technology. A lot of it's chicken and egg. I mean, we're getting criticised for not putting out directional drilling contracts because we don't like the technology we're doing. It doesn't do a good job. Most contractors only got generation 1 equipment. But contractors not just stump up for generation 4, generation 5 equipment if we're not getting out the contracts. So, yeah.
Procurement again. Go back to procurement issue.
Shared risk.
Shared risk models.
Shared risk models.
Yep. Alliance, yeah. Okay, so if everyone is happy, we might straight into it. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Greg and Larry, for some of your time. So just quickly, some of the work that we've been doing in the AI area, natural language processing, like it kind of hits some of the issues that we've just been talking about as well. So the work we're looking at in the bigger picture is trying to hit consenting. And how do we solve the bottleneck of consenting, both from the BCA's point of view, that how do they manage the consenting process that they have, checking everything that's coming in against our codes and standards, but also from the practitioner's point of view, how do the architects and engineers get a way of checking, pre-checking the designs before they send it through to a BCA to be consented. So there's a whole range of things that we have to do around that. What makes it more possible now is the technologies that we have. So BIM data, that the EBOS survey says 70% of projects are using BIM currently somewhere in their projects. So we're seeing BIM models, these fully populated models are coming out, but a lot of them are pretty crap. The work that we've done with Christchurch City Council on testing this, looking at some of the BIM models that they've received. People love slabs. Everything in a building is a slab. Your stairs are slabs. Everything that you can imagine is built out of slabs. And so there's a real data quality issue. To be able to do something intelligent with your BIM models, obviously you need to know that the object that you're dealing with is a stairway. And if it's just a whole lot of slabs, then you check the building, there's no egress. Oh, bugger. Obviously it's a fail, but there are beautiful stairs all the way through the building which are just modeled in the wrong way. So we have BIM. BIM could help us a lot, will help us a lot. We need good models out of it. The codes and standards that we have are in nicely written English that human experts can understand. They can all understand them differently, as we know from the councils. That the interpretation of our codes and standards are not always consistent across the councils. But for automated consenting, we need to be able to get these into a computable form, a form that a computer can understand and can work, apply against the BIM, and consistently determine whether something is checked or not checked. And also, we need the process that is followed to do that checking. And so the BCAs typically have very large spreadsheets where they identify what needs to be done stage by stage by stage to show that you meet compliance with a particular code standard. And these, of course, can be computerized as well. One of the opportunities we think this gives us is that instead of having 70 interpretations of a particular code or acceptable solution, we could get to a national understanding of what is the interpretation for each of our codes. And that way, all of the BCAs could interpret things in the same way. That would seem like a nice thing to get to as well. There's about 600 codes and standards which are applicable to buildings, New Zealand, Australia, and international codes and standards which are applicable. Large buildings kind of touch on about 200 codes and standards if you're doing a check across a large complicated building. We have funding from a National Science Challenge project to look at how we can use human experts to translate codes and standards into a computable form. And we have 15 of the priority codes and standards that Christchurch City Council has identified, translated. They're openly available. Anyone wants them. They're available, downloadable on the internet to have a look at these. It takes about a person a month to translate one of these codes. For a human expert to translate one of these codes, about $10,000 worth of time to do it. Multiply that against 600, you can see it's quite a bit of work. Codes and standards change all the time. So those 15 we translated in a year, 3 of them have already been updated. And so they're out of date, and we need to do more work to keep them up to date. So you can see there's a big cost, a human cost, in trying to get these translated into a computable form that we could use to try and automate code compliance checking. We also know that when we did the human translation, we had 2 humans, 2 people translating each of the codes, and they got trained beforehand, they were told how to approach it, and of course they both did it completely differently. And so you have two computable representations of the codes which are different, and you have to find a way of resolving those. And we don't want that either. We would like to have one consistent interpretation of our codes and standards. So the question on this project is, can we train an AI system to interpret them so we get one version of the codes and standards? And I'll skip through to some of the results that we have. And so here's a good result of translation. So the first line is code that we're looking at. So it says chimneys of reinforced concrete shall comply with the relevant clauses of NZS 3109 for ordinary grade concrete. And the system that we've developed so far, you can see, has taken that English text and put it into gobbledygook. And that gobbledygook is a legal rule ML, so a representation of that clause in a form that can be picked up by a computer and applied to information that you might have in a BIM model. What you can see there in green is the things that it kind of got right, and the things you can see in red are the things that it kind of got wrong. And down the bottom, you can see this is what human experts put together when they did the translation of it. So kind of a year and a half, 2 years into the project, you can see we're making some progress in being able to do this. It's not perfect. And when we look at the different codes and the acceptable solutions that we've applied this to, you can see the F1 scores are the score of accuracy that we have. And you can see that for a lot of the codes and standards, we're getting kind of 50% accuracy. We're getting half of it right in automated translation, getting half of it wrong in automated translation. The best results that we've had across all this down the bottom there is about 71% of the codes and standards correctly translated with a range of approaches. So what we're finding, we're getting to a point of understanding where some of the problems are, what we're training on. The data from human experts is not always perfect. And if we have a more consistent training set, then the results that we get here would increase. So we're looking at other ways that we can try and increase on this. I think what is very obvious is that we're not going to rely on the computer to do all the translation. It will be a computer as an assistant to a human expert that's going to make the decisions about what is the translation. But if we're getting 70 to 80% of it right, then we're going to cut down the amount of work that the human experts are going to have to do the translation. And so what we are hoping, as these become available, they'll be freely available, openly available, in the same way that anyone can buy a standard. If anyone should be able to get the computer representation of that standard, and then that could be applied to a range of tools which require information about our codes and standards to operate. We already see a few approaches to this. So I'm involved in a company called CAS, which is trying to build a system for the BCAs and for architects and engineers that will automate checking of BIM models. But you see there's a whole range of other tools, design tools, which already exist, which incorporate some part of our codes and standards. So ArchiCAD tool has a range of New Zealand specializations available to you, and they have a bracing tool, which is based around the NZS 3604. You'll see that brands also have a bracing calculation sheet, which is based around NZS 3604. So 2 organisations have gone and developed systems based around the same standard. So different interpretations of that, different people translating it. And what we'd say is once we have these automated approaches to generating a computable form is that everyone will be able to pull the same representation, the same understanding of our codes and standards into their tools, and that things will be calculated in the same way across all of the tools that we have. So that was a very quick run through. So just to give you an idea of kind of where we've got to, and I think this is kind of where we've got to in terms of our ability to automate this process, and it's not finished yet. So the PhD student who's working on this has got another 1.5 years, and we're expecting better things from it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Ritter from Aon. I understand Standards New Zealand has a desire that the technical standards are written in plain English. Do you believe that would make a difference to the AI learning process, interpretation process?
I mean, the problem is the interpretation of the plain English. You know, and Tins was already talking about, you know, the people using different words to talk about the same thing. We find that all the way through when our codes are written by individual committees, and there seems to be, I don't know what the overarching consistency is for it. It's very light. So the terminology that's used across the codes is very different for things which are the same. You know, so writing in plain English doesn't help unless we have a dictionary that we use in consistency of terms. We found that there are contradictions in some of the codes that we have, so they say different things, contradictory things, and again, you know, that hasn't been picked up by any oversight quality committee as they went through. It is something that you can check once you have a computerized version. You can check the consistency of what's been specified across all our codes and standards. So we could improve it if we develop computerized versions alongside the human written ones. But I think the plain English is going to be better for the humans. It's not going to help the computerization process, unfortunately.
Controversial one that is slightly off topic. Is it worth having New Zealand standards? Now, I'm not talking building design where we've got specific local stuff, but horizontal infrastructure, most of our stuff's coming from Europe, but we're asking the companies to spend tens of thousands to certify to a New Zealand standard.
I guess luckily the consenting process is open for feedback at the moment, isn't it? So we can make recommendations on what we think should be happening with New Zealand codes and standards.
Another interesting offline conversation. Have a beer afterwards about that one.
Several beers.
The energy is arguing a wind turbine is actually cleaner.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you.